A couple of weeks ago, President Barack Obama attended his daughter Malia's graduation from high school. He joked that he sat in the back of the room with sunglasses to hide his tears. He had been asked to give a speech that day, but he decided just to be a dad. I remember back in 2008, after his wife spoke at the nominating convention, he appeared on screen. Michelle, Malia, and Sasha were on stage, and 7-year-old Sasha had the microphone and kept interrupting his prepared remarks. "Hi, Daddy! What city are you in?" He did not say, "Give the microphone back to Mommy." He just improvised. And we witnessed a father letting his young daughter be empowered. And that has been the continuing story of his fatherhood during his stay in the White House. We've watched his girls grow into young women. He plans to stay in Washington after he leaves the presidency, so Sasha can finish high school with her friends. He has an important job, but he has also made time to be President of the United States. But sometimes I think he might have become president just so he could have Secret Service protection for his daughters. Because teenage daughters can be difficult. Just ask President George W. Bush. His 19-year-old daughter Jenna was caught using a fake ID trying to buy alcohol for herself and her twin Barbara. Now this is nothing big, it's a typical youthful indiscretion, but it looked bad for her father, especially with his history of being arrested for drunken driving when he was 30. Now, Richard Nixon had better luck with his daughters. Nixon was socially awkward, even with those who supported him. He was a vice president to Eisenhower. Everyone liked Ike. But Nixon was known as Tricky Dick. In 1968, his youngest daughter married Eisenhower's grandson. The two had met in the White House in the 50s. And the marriage connected him further with the more popular Eisenhower. And in 1971, his elder daughter got married at the White House in a lavish wedding. It was almost royal. Nixon was a complex man. And when you look at all the photos taken of him, you see the angry face, you see the sad face, you see the forced happy face. But he only seems genuinely happy at his daughter's weddings. But if there ever was a doting, protective father in the White House, it was Harry S. Truman. His daughter, Margaret, was an aspiring opera singer, and he played the piano, and they liked to play and sing together. And she was a moderate talent, but not world class. But her father's status propelled her into the spotlight before she was really ready. So when in 1950, a Washington Post music critic, Paul Hume, wrote that Margaret Truman was extremely attractive on stage, but cannot sing very well. She is flat a good deal of the time, and still cannot sing with anything approaching professional finish. President Truman wrote to Hume, "Someday I hope to meet you. When that happens, you'll need a new nose, a lot of beefsteak for black eyes, and perhaps a supporter below." The prize for worst father in the White House probably goes to Warren G. Harding. According to the website All the President's Children, Elizabeth Ann Harding was the illegitimate offspring of Warren G. Harding's affair with Nan Britton, 30 years his junior. As presidents, Harding arranged for Secret Service agencies to hand-deliver child support payments, but he refused to meet his daughter. He died in office, and when Harding's estate refused to continue to support the child, her mother, Nan Britton, wrote a best-selling book called The President's Daughter, and royalties were used to establish the Elizabeth Ann League, which helped girls in trouble. Though many tried to discredit Nan Britton, their investigations seemed only to confirm her story. Andrew Johnson had a difficult presidency and family life. He and his wife, Eliza, had 3 boys and 2 girls. The first 4 kids were born within the first 7 years of marriage, and the last child, Andrew Johnson Jr., surprised them when they had been married for 25 years. As a senator from Tennessee, he remained loyal to the Union. And thus his house, while he was in Washington, D.C., was overrun by Confederates, and his wife was a refugee under the control of Nathan Bedford Forrest, an eventual founder of the KKK. She had tuberculosis and was weak. His eldest son, Charles, joined the Union Army. Being alcoholic, he fell off his horse and died in 1863. When the Union gained control of Tennessee, Lincoln appointed Johnson as the governor of Tennessee, and the family was reunited in Nashville for a while, except for the son Robert, who was a colonel in the Union Army. In 1864, Lincoln nominated Andrew Johnson to be his vice president. Robert's alcoholism caused him to be discharged from the Army. While Andrew Johnson sought political office, Eliza and her 2 sons checked into a sanitarium in Massachusetts, where Robert was treated for alcoholism and she for tuberculosis, and 12-year-old Andrew Jr. was also treated because he was showing symptoms of TB. And their daughter, Mary's husband, got shot and died in the war. And then Lincoln got shot and Andrew Johnson was president. So the Johnsons moved into the White House. Eliza was too sick to carry on the First Lady's duties, so they fell upon the 2 daughters, Mary and Martha, who were in their 30s, and Martha also brought along her husband. Andrew put his son Robert to work as secretary, but had to fire him when the press revealed that he had been inviting prostitutes into the White House. Andrew broke probably the cardinal sin of fatherhood. He wrote and was very public that Martha was his favorite daughter. He said that she had a masculine way of thinking, which was a compliment in those days. And she, when he went to Washington as a congressman, he brought her to Washington with him to make sure she got an education. And once she escaped being the oldest daughter, taking care of all the kids, she was a parentified child because mom was always sick. She was the one that was taking care of all the little ones. She did not want to go back to Tennessee. And so she decided to stay in Washington as long-term guest of friends from Tennessee, President James K. Polk and his wife. So she was more familiar with the White House than her father when the family eventually moved in, because she had lived there for years. And so while he was president, she oversaw repairs to the White House and started a portrait gallery of all the former presidents. Meanwhile, her husband was a senator from Tennessee. Mary primarily took care of Martha's children and her own children, and she was, while she was in the White House. And the grandchildren were a comfort to Andrew. He was the first president ever to be impeached. He was a Southern Democrat that Lincoln had selected to hopefully bring union to the country. So he didn't get along with the Republicans that were Lincoln's party, and so they didn't like his policies. And he didn't get along with the Democrats from the South because he was a traitor to the Confederacy, so nobody liked him. So his only joy was really coming home from work and playing with the grandchildren. He was impeached, but he wasn't kicked out of office. And so when his term was ending, they decided to throw a farewell party, and Mary, his daughter, decided to hold a farewell party for the children of the politicians, because probably the children were easier to get along with. And so they had a party for the children, and all the parents had to sit at the side and watch the children frolic, and that was his final birthday party while he was in the office. Well, if there is a father that could be worse than Warren G. Harding, it probably was Thomas Jefferson, the only Unitarian I'm listing amongst this bunch. He married Martha Wales Skelton in 1772. She was 23 years old, widowed at 19, and bereft of her only son at age 22. Together, Thomas and Martha had 6 children, and only 2 survived until adulthood. After the 5th child died, when Jefferson was overseas, he vowed to turn down future overseas assignments. And he was home at Monticello for the birth of his 6th child. But Martha, his wife, died 4 months later at the age of 33. So in 1782, Jefferson was 39 and a single father. His daughter Patsy was 10, and Polly was 4. Through his wife, he had inherited many slaves to help care for the farm and the children. In 1784, he became the U.S. minister to France. Patsy was 12, Polly was 6, and he brought along a 14-year-old slave, Sally Hemings, to help with child care. Sally was the half-sister of his wife, an aunt to the girls. His father-in-law had impregnated his half-African slave. So Sally was 3/4 European and may have, in fact, resembled the girls' mothers. It gets creepier. Technically, Sally Hemings was free as soon as France abolished slavery in 1789. According to her son Madison, she became pregnant by Jefferson in 1789, and rather than staying free in France, he chose to return with him. Supposedly that child died in infancy, but the records are sketchy. Sally Hemings gave birth to 6 more children, starting in 1795. Unlike other slaves in the record at Monticello, Jefferson made no notes about the father. And people made notes about the fathers because slaves were like property. Jefferson was a botanist and a biologist, and they kept track of the lines of slavery just like they would prize horses. That was important to their fortune on the farm. But somehow he forgot who the father was of those 6 children. In 1998, DNA linked Jefferson to the descendants of Sally Hemings. The 3 sons lived in the main house, and they all learned to play violin. Jefferson played violin. The 2 daughters ran away and were never pursued. In fact, there is a story that one of the overseers of Monticello actually gave money to one of them as she was leaving. And they, being 7/8 European with a red-headed father, they were very fair, and they probably went north or maybe to Washington, D.C., and married into white society, and that branch of the Hemings family has passed for white ever since. In 1825, Jefferson freed Hemings' male descendants. Patsy, his daughter, freed her Aunt Sally, and she lived her last 9 years with her sons. Jefferson presents the most troubling picture of fatherhood. How can one love one's children if one also owns them? That idea of owning one's children is not that very far from some people's concept of fatherhood. There's the old saying, I brought you into this world, I can take you out. There is the common gun tragedy where an estranged father kills all his children and his wife and then himself. As if a suicide of just himself isn't enough, he has to kill the rest of his property as well. And then there's the law of the land at the time when Jefferson was marrying. The status of his first wife was very low. All of Martha's property, her land and her slaves, became Jefferson's as soon as they were married. At the time of the marriage, white women were practically slaves. Mary Wollstonecraft, a British Unitarian philosopher, wrote in 1792 in Vindication for the Rights of Women, it is acknowledged that women spend many of the first years of their lives in acquiring a smattering of accomplishments. Meanwhile, strength of the body and mind are sacrificed to the libertine notions of beauty, to the desire of establishing themselves the only way women can rise in the world, by marriage. They must marriage advantageously. To this object their time is sacrificed, and their persons are often legally prostituted. She was running against the grain of the time. So things have changed in general about what the role of a father is since the founding of this country. Fathers do not have absolute control of life and death of wife and children under law as they did in those days. But regardless of race and slavery, having a 46-year-old man with a 17-year-old daughter having children with a 16-year-old is not cool. But even if that first pregnancy was just apocryphal, it's still not cool that even if the first pregnancy was 25 years later, or 5 years later, when she was 21. It's just unseemly. The issues of race and sex have evolved in this country, but they haven't gotten less complex. The status of women and people of color and who has the right to consent to sex are still plaguing us today. And to top it all off, Jefferson also went to war with Muslims along the Barbary coast, which is now Muslims, sending the Marines to the shores of Tripoli. So we have this thing that the more things change, the more they stay the same. This stuff is not easy. This conflict of how to be pluralistic when it comes to religion, when it comes to gender, when it comes to race, when it comes to preparing our children to live in a diverse world. When we look on the pages of history and see the founding fathers, or see noble faces carved on Mount Rushmore, we're taught to see demigods. When we see the faces on TV, we're taught to see celebrities. And when we're small, our parents are like gods. But as we grow, we learn that they're only human. We see their failings. We try to pick up the shattered pieces of their legacy, and we have to accept their humanity, or we will never be able to accept our own. We have a duty to pass on the lessons we have learned in this world. Jefferson passed on the beauty of music to his sons. And about slavery, he said, "I tremble when I think that God is just." Yet he couldn't free his own children during his own lifetime. We can learn from good and bad examples, and we can benefit from good and bad experiences. In reviewing these stories, mostly on websites of firstladies.org and all the president's children, I saw that the most powerful men in the world were probably brought to tears by the successes and failures of their children. And powerful women also. Our jobs may be important, but the child near us needs us more. We need to find a way. Find a way to honor our Father today. Whether it's like our current president who grew up largely not knowing his father, taking that example and making sure that his children knew him, or whether it's following the example of love that your father may have given you. And whether you have children or not, whether you are male or female, there may be opportunities to mentor someone. So honor your father today by being a better father today. Do the things that good fathers do. No matter who you are, or what gender or role has been assigned to you, offer encouragement, provide stability, guidance, and don't forget to play. Happy Father's Day.